My name is Sarah Miller. I'm 62 years old, and I thought I had already lived through the hardest chapters of my life. I raised a son who walked away from me, stayed silent for 2 full decades, and never once picked up the phone to check if his mother was even alive. For years, the silence gnawed at me like a slow disease. Every Christmas, every birthday, every Thanksgiving, I set an extra plate out of habit, only to quietly put it back in the cupboard when nobody showed. But one snowy December afternoon, everything shifted. The phone rang, and I saw a name I never expected to see again. My son, Daniel. My heart nearly stopped. After 20 years of nothing, he was reaching out. His voice trembled at first, but his words were steady. "Mom, would you come to Christmas dinner with us this year?" I dropped into the nearest chair, the room spinning around me. After all this time, after all the years of absence and silence, why now? White right pointing backhand index before I share what happened next. Tell me in the comments where you're watching from, and don't forget to subscribe for more stories like this. The moment the call ended, I sat frozen at my kitchen table. The house was quiet except for the old refrigerator humming in the corner. Outside, snowflakes tapped gently against the window, but inside, my chest thudded with a storm of questions. Why now? Why after 20 years of nothing but silence, guilt, and unanswered letters? He had turned his back on me when he was barely 20, swearing he didn't need a mother like me. I remembered the exact words that cut deeper than any knife. "You're just dead weight, Mom. I can take care of myself." And then the door slammed. That was the last time I saw him. For years, I replayed that moment. I tried to reach out. Birthday cards, graduation gifts, even just small notes slipped into the mail with the hope he might open one. Every envelope came back unopened, marked return to sender. He had erased me, and the world seemed to move on without me. Now, suddenly, out of the blue, he wanted me at his Christmas table. I poured myself a cup of coffee, though my hand shook so badly most of it sloshed onto the counter. Sitting back down, I whispered into the quiet, "What do you want from me, Daniel?" Because I knew, deep down, this wasn't about reconciliation. Something else was at play. As I stared at the phone still glowing with his name, memories flooded in uninvited. I remembered when Daniel was a boy, all skinny elbows and a mop of dark hair that refused to stay combed. He used to press his little hand into mine when we crossed the street, his eyes wide with trust. I remembered the late nights when he'd come down from his room scared after a nightmare, and I'd let him curl up on the couch with me under a blanket until he fell asleep. He had been my whole world. And when he left, it wasn't just him walking out. It was as though the lights in my house dimmed permanently. But then another memory struck, a much more recent one. 3 years ago, after decades of working at jobs and living on the edge of survival, I had stumbled into a strange twist of fortune. An old friend had passed and left me a share of property I never knew existed. When the land was sold, my life changed overnight. For the first time in my life, I wasn't worrying about bills, rent, or groceries. I wasn't rich by the world's standards, but for someone who had spent decades scraping by, it felt like I had won the lottery. Daniel didn't know that part of my life. He didn't know the woman he abandoned no longer worried about a leaky roof or an empty fridge. And something in my gut told me, that's exactly why he was reaching out now. The days following his call stretched like rubber bands. I couldn't stop thinking about it. At night, I'd sit in my recliner with the TV flickering, barely paying attention, just staring at the phone on the table like it might bite me. I'd ask myself over and over, should I go? Should I ignore him? What if it's just a trick? My best friend, Carol, came by one afternoon and found me pacing the living room. She listened quietly as I explained the situation, then crossed her arms. "Sarah, you know as well as I do, people don't change overnight. If he's calling now, there's a reason. You better protect your heart." I sighed. But what if he finally wants to fix things? What if he regrets it all? Carol shook her head slowly. If he wanted to fix it, he would have done it before 20 years passed. Her words stung, but I knew she was right. Still, something deep inside me, a mother's stubborn hope, whispered, "What if?" That question clawed at me until I could barely sleep. The night before Christmas Eve, I pulled out an old showbox from the back of my closet. Inside were stacks of unsent letters, all addressed to Daniel. Some were birthday notes, others were desperate pleas to reconnect, and a few were simple updates about my life. I picked one up, written in my shaky handwriting from 10 years ago. "Dear Daniel, I miss you. I don't know what I did wrong, but I want to make it right. I just want to hear your voice again." Reading those words broke me all over again. I wept quietly, clutching the letter to my chest. That night, I promised myself something. If I went to his dinner, I would go on my terms. I would not beg, I would not plead, and I would not let him rip my heart apart again. For the first time in 20 years, I felt a strange sense of strength rising in me. On Christmas morning, I stood in front of my bathroom mirror, hands gripping the edge of the sink. My reflection looked older than I remembered. Lines deepened, hair grayer, but my eyes still held fire. I thought about all the lonely Christmases before this one, about every meal eaten in silence, every candle blown out alone. I thought about how easily Daniel had erased me. And then, I thought about the money. About the truth he didn't know. That's when it clicked. I wasn't just going to his dinner as a broken, desperate mother. I was going as a woman who had survived without him, who had built a life on her own, and who carried a truth that would shake his perfect little dinner table to the core. I wiped my tears, straightened my coat, and whispered to my reflection, "All right, Daniel. You want me at your Christmas dinner? You'll get me. But you're not ready for what I'm bringing with me." Tightened my scarf as I stood at the edge of the driveway, staring at the house that loomed before me. My son's house. A place I had never been invited to, a place I had only imagined through years of silence. Snow crunched softly under my boots, and the faint glow of golden light spilled through the frosted windows, spilling warmth into the bitter cold. My hands trembled inside my gloves, not from the winter air, but from the storm twisting in my chest. The front door stood tall, painted a crisp navy blue, with a perfectly crafted holiday wreath hanging in the center. I noticed the small touches, string lights wrapped neatly around the porch, lanterns glowing softly by the steps, and a spotless welcome mat that read "Home Sweet Home." I almost laughed at the irony. Home sweet home. For 20 years, his home had excluded me. For 20 years, mine had been an empty shell without him. I drew in a long breath, lifted my chin, and started up the steps. My knuckles barely grazed the wood before the door swung open. A woman stood there, her smile polite but cautious. Her dark hair was tucked neatly into a bun, and she wore a deep red sweater that matched the holiday decor behind her. I didn't know her face, but I didn't need an introduction. I knew instantly. This was my son's wife. "Mrs. Miller," she asked softly, her voice careful, like she wasn't sure what version of me she'd find standing on her doorstep. I swallowed the lump in my throat and nodded. "Yes, you must be. Emily." Her eyes widened slightly. "He told you about me." I let a small smile curl my lips. "No, but I can tell." There was a pause, a heavy one, but then she stepped aside, gesturing me in. "Please, come in. It's freezing out there." I stepped into the warmth, the scent of cinnamon and roasted turkey wrapping around me instantly. My boots squeaked against the polished wood floor, and I felt almost out of place, like an intruder in a world that wasn't mine. The house was stunning. High ceilings with exposed beams, a stone fireplace crackling softly, stockings hung neatly in a row, 3 small ones and 2 larger ones. My heart clenched as my eyes fell on the smallest stockings embroidered with names: Sophie, Michael, and Grace. Grandchildren. My knees almost buckled. I hadn't even known their names, hadn't known I had stockings in someone else's world. The sound of footsteps broke my trance, and when I turned, there he was. Daniel. He looked older, of course. His hair was shorter, flecked with gray at the temples. His jawline was sharper, his frame broader, but his eyes, those same deep-set eyes, were still his. My son. For a moment, neither of us spoke. The air thickened, pressing down on my chest. His mouth opened, closed, then opened again. Mom, he finally said. Just one word, quiet but heavy with all the years we'd lost. I nodded slowly, my voice catching as I whispered back, Daniel. He shifted uncomfortably, shoving his hands into his pockets, as if unsure whether to hug me or keep his distance. Instead, he cleared his throat and gestured toward the living room. Come on in. Dinner's almost ready. As I followed him, 3 pairs of curious eyes peeked out from behind the staircase. Children, my grandchildren. They stared at me like I was a character from a storybook. I tried to smile at them, but my lips trembled too much. Emily called them out gently. Kids, this is your grandmother. The word stung. Grandmother. It felt foreign, like a title I hadn't owned. The oldest, a girl with her father's sharp eyes, tilted her head. I didn't know we had one. Her words sliced me open, but I forced a smile. Well, I didn't know I had you either. The girl blinked, then gave a shy smile before darting back up the stairs, her siblings trailing behind. Dinner wasn't quite ready yet, so Emily offered me a tour of the house. I followed her down hallways lined with family photos, birthdays, vacations, school events, all moments I had missed. My eyes caught on one picture of Daniel holding a baby girl, his expression soft and full of pride. I felt my throat tighten. Emily spoke gently as we walked. The kids were excited when they heard you were coming. They don't really know much about you. I swallowed hard. That doesn't surprise me. She hesitated, then added, Daniel, he doesn't talk about the past much. I gave a faint nod. Neither do I. But inside, I was screaming. Every photo was a reminder of the years I wasn't there, years I wasn't even allowed to be there. When we finally sat down to dinner, the tension was thick enough to slice. The table was set beautifully, china plates, silver cutlery, crystal glasses, but it felt like we were all sitting on a stage, pretending we were part of some picture-perfect family painting. Daniel sat at the head of the table, Emily to his right, me to his left. The children sat quietly, sneaking curious glances at me between bites of mashed potatoes. So, Mom, Daniel finally said, his tone carefully neutral. How have you been? The question was simple, but loaded. How had I been? Should I tell him about the nights I cried myself to sleep? The jobs I worked just to keep the lights on? The loneliness that hollowed me out year after year? Or should I tell him the truth? That I had survived, that I had built something for myself, that I was no longer the broken woman he left behind. I chose the middle ground. I've been making it through. Life has its ways. He gave a Kate nod, as if that answer was enough, and moved on to asking the children about their school projects. As dinner went on, I listened more than I spoke. I watched the way Emily gently corrected the children when they reached too far across the table. I watched the way Daniel laughed at Michael's knock-knock joke, his eyes crinkling at the corners the same way his father's used to. And in those moments, I realized something painful. He had built a life without me. A good one. But I also noticed something else. Every time his eyes flickered toward me, there was a shadow there, a weight. He wasn't as comfortable as he pretended to be. And that's when it hit me. This invitation wasn't just about Christmas dinner. It was about something more. Something he wasn't saying. After dessert, while the kids ran off to play and Emily tidied the kitchen, Daniel and I were left alone in the living room. The fire crackled softly, and the silence between us grew unbearable. He cleared his throat. I didn't think you'd come. I looked at him steadily. I almost didn't. He shifted in his seat, leaning forward with his elbows on his knees. I know it's strange, after all this time, but things change. I raised a brow. Do they? He hesitated, his jaw tightening. Yeah, they do. I waited for him to say more, but he didn't. Instead, He stood abruptly and walked toward the window, staring out at the snow falling under the streetlight. And for the first time that night, I saw it. A flicker of something behind his calm exterior. Restlessness, maybe even desperation. Something was brewing. Daniel stood at the window, his frame outlined by the dim orange glow of the fireplace. Snow drifted lazily outside, falling against the glass in soft flurries, but his posture was tense, rigid, as though he were trying to hold himself together by sheer will. His reflection in the glass looked older than I remembered, drawn, tired, and burdened with thoughts he hadn't yet put into words. The silence stretched on. The fire popped sharply, filling the room with the smell of cedar. I clasped my hands together in my lap, the fabric of my skirt crumpling between my fingers, and waited for him to say something, anything. But he didn't. Instead, the muffled laughter of children carried faintly from upstairs, seeping into the room like an echo of a life I'd never been allowed into. My chest tightened at the sound, so warm and alive, yet just out of reach. Finally, Daniel exhaled and turned back to face me. His expression was guarded, the kind of look people wear when they are rehearsing what not to say. "I think we should head back to the table," he said, his voice steady but distant. I nodded, though neither of us moved right away. Then he gestured toward the dining room, and I followed, my steps slow, deliberate, as though the floorboards might crack beneath me if I placed my weight wrong. The dining room looked different now that the children had been excused. Their plates still sat scattered with half-eaten rolls and crumbs of pie, little fingerprints smudging the silverware. Emily was finishing up in the kitchen, stacking dessert plates with careful precision, while the faint clatter of running water told me she was rinsing them before putting them into the dishwasher. Daniel pulled out a chair for me, an act so formal it almost felt theatrical, and I lowered myself onto it, though it cold against my back. He sat across from me, hands flat on the table, eyes on the untouched wine glass in front of him. The silence was suffocating. It wasn't just the absence of words, it was the weight of everything that had never been said. The years of unanswered letters, the holidays passed with empty chairs, the phone calls that never came, all of it hovered between us, thick as smoke. Emily returned then, wiping her hands on a towel before hanging it neatly over the oven handle. She glanced between the two of us, reading the stiffness instantly. She didn't say much, just offered a small, strained smile. "Coffee? Tea?" she asked. Her voice was soft, but I could hear the effort behind it, the way she was trying to keep things civil, to keep the cracks from widening too soon. "Tea," I murmured, though I didn't really want it. Daniel said nothing. Emily brought the cups out on a tray, setting them down gently as though noise alone might break the fragile balance in the room. The steam curled upward, carrying with it the faint smell of chamomile. I lifted the cup, more for something to do than for comfort. The porcelain was warm against my palms. "So," Emily began carefully, her voice carrying the tone of someone stepping into a conversation they didn't want to moderate, "the kids really enjoyed meeting you tonight." Her attempt at normalcy was kind, but Daniel's eyes flickered sharply toward her, as if warning her not to go too far. She caught it, pressed her lips together, and sipped her coffee instead. The silence returned, heavier than before. Finally, I set my cup down and looked directly at Daniel. "You didn't bring me here just to sit in silence." His jaw tightened. "Maybe silence is easier." "For you," I shot back before I could stop myself. His eyes hardened. "And for you." I leaned forward, my voice steady. "I've lived in silence for 20 years, Daniel. I didn't come here to drown in it again." Something flickered in his expression then. Not anger, not softness either, but a shift. He leaned back in his chair, crossing his arms, studying me like I was a puzzle he hadn't decided was worth solving. Emily excused herself quietly, slipping upstairs to check on the children, though I suspected she was giving us space more than anything. And now it was just us. Daniel tapped his finger lightly against the table, a restless rhythm. "You think you deserve answers." "I don't think, I know," I replied, my voice firmer now. "And so do you. You wouldn't have invited me if you didn't. He looked away, staring at the faint wax drips on one of the candlesticks at the center of the table. When he spoke again, his voice was lower. You left me. The words hit me like a slap. That's not. You left, he repeated, sharper this time, his eyes flashing. Don't dress it up. Don't tell yourself a prettier version. You left, and I had to build a life without you. The fire from the other room cracked again, loud enough to startle me. I pressed my hands against the edge of the table, grounding myself, fighting to keep my voice steady. You don't know the whole story, I whispered. Then tell me, he shot back. The room seemed to contract around us, shrinking until it was just him and me, and the years of silence would both clung to like armor. My mouth went dry. Words pressed against my lips, but fear held them back. What if telling the truth only widened the distance between us? What if it shattered what little bridge tonight had built? But then I saw it, the flicker in his eyes, the same flicker I'd noticed earlier at the window. Beneath the hardness, there was something else, a desperate need to know, even if he didn't want to admit it. I drew a shaky breath. I never stopped loving you. Not for a second. But there were things you don't know. Choices that weren't mine. His brow furrowed, confusion breaking through the anger. What do you mean? I opened my mouth, then closed it again. My heart thundered, my palms slick with sweat. The truth sat heavy inside me, dangerous and unsteady. But before I could speak, the sound of little footsteps pattered on the stairs. Michael peeked into the dining room, his small voice carrying across the tension. Dad, can I have water? Daniel's head snapped toward him, his hardened expression softening instantly. Yeah, buddy, I'll get it. As he stood, the spell broke. The silence shifted, not gone but fractured, like a sheet of glass with cracks spreading through it. While Daniel fetched the water, I stared at the candlelight dancing across the table. My hands trembled as I folded the napkin in front of me, unfolding it again, folding it once more. When he returned, he handed Michael the glass, ruffled his hair, and sent him back upstairs. His face was calmer now, but the weight hadn't lifted. He sat back down, resting his arms on the table. You're saying there's more to the story? Yes, I said softly. Much more. And then the silence returned, not empty, not hostile, but waiting. This time, it felt like a silence we could finally start filling. The candle flame flickered, sending shadows crawling across the dining room wall, as if the house itself leaned in to listen. Daniel's gaze pinned me in place, steady, unrelenting. His elbows rested on the table, his hands folded together loosely, but his eyes told another story, an ache, a hunger for words I'd swallowed for decades. Yes, I whispered again, softer this time. There's more, a lot more. He didn't move, didn't blink, didn't even breathe in a way I could hear. It was as though he'd turned to stone, waiting, daring me to carve through the silence with the truth. My throat tightened. My hands curled into fists on my lap beneath the table, nails pressing crescents into my palms. I had rehearsed this moment in sleepless nights, whispering confessions into the dark, but now, sitting across from him, the firelight painting his face in bronze and shadow, those words threatened to choke me. Daniel broke the stillness first. His voice was quieter now, almost hoarse. Then tell me, all of it. I lifted my eyes to meet his, and in them I saw not just the man across the table but the boy he used to be, the one who once made promises under starry skies, the one who once swore he'd never leave me alone in the world. That boy lived somewhere deep in him still, the hidden beneath years of anger and silence. I didn't leave because I wanted to, I began, my voice trembling. I left because I had no choice. His jaw clenched. There's always a choice. Not then, I said quickly, leaning forward, urgency pushing through the fear. Not when everything was stacked against me. Against us. The sharpness in his features faltered for the briefest second, and I pressed on before the moment slipped away. You remember that night I disappeared, I asked. His silence was its own answer. I didn't just vanish, I continued. I was told to leave, pushed out, cornered, and if I hadn't gone, you would have been dragged down with me. Daniel's brow furrowed, confusion tightening his expression. Who told you to leave? My voice caught, but I forced it out. Your father. Daniel jerked back in his chair as though struck. My father. Yes. The word tumbled from me before I could soften it. He came to me. He made it very clear. I was not welcome in your life. Not then, not ever. He said I was a distraction, a weakness, that if I stayed, I'd destroy your future. And he wasn't asking, Daniel. He was threatening. Daniel's face hardened, but not at me. His hand curled into a fist on the table, knuckles whitening. He told me if I loved you, I'd walk away, I whispered. And God, I thought I was protecting you. I thought leaving would keep you safe, keep your path clear. I didn't think you'd forgive me if I stayed, and he tore everything apart. For a moment, Daniel didn't move. His chest rose and fell, heavy, deliberate, as though he were trying to steady himself against the surge of memory. My father, he said slowly, his tone laced with disbelief, never mentioned a word. Of course he didn't, I murmured. He made sure you never knew. That was his power, and I carried the blame so you could hate me instead of hating him. His eyes snapped to mine, sharp and piercing. Do you expect me to believe that? The old Daniel, stubborn, skeptical, unyielding, flared in his gaze. But underneath, I saw the crack. The boy who had always suspected his father of pulling invisible strings, the man who had learned too late how deep those strings ran. You don't have to believe me, I said softly, though every part of me ached for him to. But it's the truth, and it's why I left. The room was silent again, but this silence was alive, restless, filled with the weight of new knowledge. Daniel stared at the table, the muscles in his jaw shifting as though he were grinding down years of memory, reshaping them in the light of what I'd said. I wanted to reach across, to touch his hand, to anchor him, but I didn't dare. The gulf between us was still too wide, even if cracks had begun to show. Finally, he spoke. His voice was lower now, rough around the edges. You think you protected me, but do you know what your silence did? Do you know what 20 years of wondering felt like? Tears burned at the corners of my eyes, but I refused to let them fall. Every day, I've lived it too, Daniel. Different sides of the same silence. I kept quiet because I thought it was the only way to save you. And in the process, I lost you. He shook his head, pressing his palms against his temples, fingers digging into his hair. He always wanted control. Always. I thought I broke free from that shadow. But his voice cracked. He was still pulling the strings, wasn't he? The question wasn't for me, but I answered anyway. Yes. Daniel pushed back from the table suddenly, standing, pacing the room with long strides. The boards creaked beneath his feet. His shadow leapt across the walls as he moved, the firelight catching the sharp planes of his face. He turned abruptly. If what you're saying is true, there has to be proof. Something. I hesitated. Then, slowly, I reached into my bag. My fingers brushed against the envelope I had carried for years, worn soft at the edges, the ink fading but still legible. I kept this, I said, my hand trembling as I slid it across the table. Daniel's eyes dropped to it. He didn't touch it at first, as though afraid it might burn him. Then, finally, he picked it up, unfolding the yellowed paper inside. His father's handwriting stared back at him, harsh, deliberate strokes. I watched as Daniel's eyes moved over the words. His lips parted slightly, breath catching, then tightening into a hiss. His hand shook, but he read every line. When he finished, he lowered the letter slowly, his eyes wide, disbelief and fury warring within them. He really did this. His voice was barely audible. He told you to leave. He threatened you. Yes, I whispered, Daniel's hand tightened around the letter, crumpling the edges. His shoulders sagged under the weight of it, his anger collapsing into something rawer, more vulnerable. "All these years," he muttered. "I thought you chose to go. I thought I wasn't enough." The pain in his voice cut through me like glass. "You were always enough," I said, leaning forward, my voice breaking. "That's the part you never knew. You were the only thing that was enough." Daniel sank back into his chair, letter still clutched in his hand. He stared at me, his eyes wet, though no tears fell. "You should have told me," he said finally. "You should have trusted me to fight for us." "I wanted to," I admitted. "But I was 20, Daniel. Scared. Alone. Your father wasn't a man you fought against. He was a man you survived. And I didn't want you to lose everything because of me." His lips pressed into a hard line. He looked at me for a long time, his silence almost unbearable. Then, finally, he exhaled. "I don't know how to forgive 20 years of lies," he said softly. I nodded, tears slipping free now, tracing hot lines down my cheeks. "I'm not asking you to. I just needed you to know the truth. For once, I needed you to hear it from me." The fire crackled louder, filling the gap between us. Upstairs, the muffled sound of children's laughter echoed faintly again, a reminder that life went on even in the middle of broken truths. Daniel wiped a hand across his face, staring at the letter again, then back at me. His eyes softened, only slightly, but enough for me to see the shift. "You carried this alone all this time," he said, almost to himself. "Yes." He shook his head slowly, his voice quiet but weighted. "No one should have to." For the first time that night, something in his voice wasn't sharp or distant. It was heavy, yes, but also human, real, almost tender. And in that moment, I knew the silence had finally broken. The silence that followed my revelation felt heavier than anything I had ever carried. My parents sat frozen, as if their chairs had suddenly turned to stone beneath them. My mother's fingers twitched near her glass, her nails tapping lightly against the wood, while my father's jaw tightened so much I could see the vein pulsing in his temple. For a moment, it was as though time itself had stopped, the air unmoving, the clock on the wall holding its second hand in place, and me sitting there, heart thundering in my chest, waiting for a response that didn't come. I didn't realize I was gripping the edge of the table until my knuckles turned white. The room felt like it was closing in on me, every wall inching closer, suffocating me with memories of every time I had been told I was a disappointment, a mistake, all wise, nothing. And yet here I was, laying bare the truth they had never imagined, the truth they had pretended didn't exist. I wasn't the broken child they thought I was. I had built something extraordinary. But looking at their faces, I understood in a flash. They weren't proud. They weren't even surprised. They were angry. "Enough of this nonsense," my father finally said, his voice a low growl. He pushed his chair back so hard it screeched against the floor, echoing through the dining room like a warning. He stood, looming over me, his shadow stretching across the table as if he could swallow me whole. "You come into this house after years of absence, spouting these lies, trying to humiliate us in our own home. Do you really think we're stupid enough to believe this fairy tale?" The word fairy tale cut deeper than I expected. I had spent years working 16-hour days, pouring every ounce of myself into building my company, fighting for a seat at tables where people half my age or twice my arrogance tried to push me out. And yet, in this room, with these two people who were supposed to know me better than anyone, my reality was dismissed as fiction. "I'm not lying," I said, my voice shaking at first but then growing firmer. "Every word I told you is the truth. I built it all. The company, the life, everything. And you don't have to believe me. The world already does." My mother's eyes darted toward him, then back to me. She opened her mouth, closed it, then finally whispered, "Why are you doing this to us?" "To you." The laugh that escaped me was sharp, bitter, nothing like the sound I once knew. "This isn't about you. This is about me finally telling the truth after years of silence. You wanted me gone when I dropped out. You called me a disgrace when I stumbled, and you never once asked if I was okay. And now that I've built something for myself, you sit here acting like I've committed some kind of crime by succeeding." Her lips trembled, but no words came. My father slammed his fist against the table, making the silverware jump. "You think success erases the shame you brought on this family? You think money makes you better than us? You'll always be the same failure who walked out of this house." That was it. The line. The sentence that snapped something inside me for good. I had been holding on, maybe to the faintest thread of hope that they'd look at me differently, that they'd see me not as the broken version of their expectations but as the woman I had become. But when his words spilled across the table like poison, I knew there was no saving this. Slowly, I stood. My chair slid back with a soft scrape, almost timid compared to the explosion of his voice. I looked at both of them, their faces familiar, yet foreign, like portraits of people I once knew but could never touch again. "You're right about one thing," I said quietly. "I'll always be the same person who walked out of this house. The difference is, this time, I'm not coming back." The silence that followed wasn't the suffocating kind from earlier. This one felt lighter, freer, like I had cut the final string tying me to the weight I had carried my entire life. I turned and walked out of the dining room, the sound of my footsteps echoing in the hall. My parents didn't follow. They didn't call my name. They didn't ask me to stop. And that silence told me everything. The night air hit me as I stepped outside, cool and sharp against my skin. I hadn't realized how shallow my breaths had been until then. I leaned against the front door for a moment, staring up at the sky, the stars faint against the glow of the streetlights. Somewhere deep inside, I thought maybe I'd cry. Maybe I'd collapse under the weight of it all. But instead, I felt still. Almost calm. Walking down the path, I noticed how familiar everything still looked. The uneven bricks, the porch light flickering, the roses my mother used to prune with such care now wilted and dry. But instead of feeling nostalgic, I felt detached, as though I were walking through someone else's memories, not my own. My car was parked where I'd left it, sleek and polished, a symbol of the life I had built on my own terms. Sliding into the driver's seat, I rested my hands on the wheel, staring ahead at the road. For a second, I hesitated, not because I wanted to go back, but because I knew what this drive represented. Once I pressed that accelerator, I wasn't just leaving their house. I was leaving behind years of trying, years of hoping for something they could never give me. I was choosing myself, fully and unapologetically, for the first time in my life. I started the engine. The low hum filled the night, grounding me in the present, reminding me that this, right here, was real. I wasn't the broken girl they'd discarded. I was the woman who had rebuilt herself, piece by piece, stronger than they'd ever imagined. And as the car rolled forward, I didn't look back.